G'day coppers, welcome back to the bush. In this episode of Lockup's for All Driving, we're going to compare the new lithium ion powered Bluetti camping box versus the old school lead acid powered Projecta PowerHub. Let's get into it. So first up, let's compare the features. Let's head to the healing bench and check it out. So let's have a look at the features of the EB70 from Bluetti. First up, retractable handle, actually works quite well. And on the top, we've also got a wireless charging pad, 15 watts. For the likes of charging your late model iPhone or your Galaxy phone. Now, we have a light here. It's got 2 levels of brightness and a flashing mode, which is fantastic. I don't know why they keep putting them flashing modes in, but they do. You've got an LCD display here to tell you how much battery you've got left. Also your wattage input and your wattage output. Also says 50 Hertz here, no doubt that's the frequency pertaining to your AC output. Over on here, we got our inputs. So we got our 12 volt to 28 volt, 200 watt max, it says here. So you plug in either your car charger or your mains charger, or you can also plug in your solar input into here too. And it's got MPPT, which is maximum power point tracking. It's a more efficient way of handling the solar input out of that and PWM or pulse width modulation. Okay, onto the DC outputs. PD 3.0 100 watt. We've got 2 of those. We'll get into what that is later on in the video. 2 Type A USBs, 5 volt 3 amps. So they're not any good for the likes of your mobile phone, but they're great for iPads or Galaxy tabs. A couple of 12 volt 10 amp outputs, which I'll probably never ever use. And a cigarette lighter socket. They're great, but what's missing? That's right, 50 amp Anderson. Where's my 50 amp Anderson? Righto. Now these are your 2 AC outputs. Now it's rated to 1000 watts. So obviously we need to test it at 1000 watts, and we'll get into that later in the video. But first, let's have a look at the power hub. Now the power hub's a little different. You have to actually put your own battery inside the thing. And at the moment I've got a almost dead 105 amp hour full river battery. Got a couple of lids under the sides, so we'll have a look here. So this is actually a Engel compatible plug. And we've got the turn on and turn off for our 300 watt full sine wave. And as you can hear, the battery's stuffed and it complains. But that seems to work rather well, though admittedly I haven't tested it at 300 watts. Now we've got a couple of ring terminals here and our good friend, the Anderson 50 amp. Let's spin it around and have a look at the other side. Now on this side, we got 2 standard cigarette lighter sockets and 2 12 volt 15 amp merit plugs. I don't know anyone who uses merits, but you might, so that'd be fantastic. We've got a small LCD display in there. It tells me my battery is completely stuffed, but it does other things useful, like it tells you the percentage of battery left. Okay, and we've got 2 USB 5 volt at 2 amp. So that's the power hub. Now with ever decreasing payloads in the back of our 4-wheel drives, weight has become a major concern. So I thought I'd drag out the bathroom scales and check out the differences. Firstly, the Bluetti. Now I'll put the photograph up on the screen and it comes in at just over 9 kilograms. And now for the power hub. Now I can tell you from reefing this thing in and out in the back of the 4-wheel drive in various parts of the country, this is not a lightweight. A scratch over 35. Let's compare the two on a graph. Firstly, the Bluetti. Now that comes in at a reasonable 9 kilograms. Projecta PowerHub, you got to remember this is chock right full of 105 amp hour of full river AGM lead acid battery. And that tips the scales 35.5 kilograms. Wow, it's 394% heavier, almost 4 times as heavy. Is there any wonder I grunt when I pick the thing up? Now, in order to use the power contained with the Bluetti, well, first thing you need to do is charge it up. And they provide a couple of options in the box to get you going. Firstly, the mains powered charger, and then you've also got the car 12 volt charger. They also provide cabling to charge it off solar. But how long does it take? Well, I checked it out, and these are the results. On the left hand side here, we've got the time in hours ranging from 0 right through to 8 hours, and a couple of different options I tested along the bottom here. First one is the mains charger. So this is an external unit. It's an extra little box you carry with you, and it's a 25.2 volt 8 amp DC power supply run from your AC wall socket, whether that be 110 volts or 220 through to 240 volts AC.
It took from 0% right through to 100% charge, 3.4 hours, and that's acceptable in my book. Next up, the automotive charger. Now, the automotive charger runs from your DC power supply or your old school cigarette lighter socket. The voltage I chose was 13.8 volts, that being the average voltage you'll see when the car's running, and that took what I consider a completely unacceptable 7.2 hours. Now, the reason I say that's unacceptable is when you're doing a multiple day outback trip, you're probably not going to be running that long every day. So if you head out that morning with the unit completely discharged, you can't reliably expect to roll into camp that night with the unit completely charged for the next night's use. And that's not good. So I thought, well, there's got to be a way around this. And I looked at the DC power supply, and that's outputting 25.2 volts DC. And the front of the unit actually says it'll take a maximum of 28 volts. So what I have here is a laboratory variable voltage DC power supply. So I cranked it up to 28 volts and let her rip. These are the results. 3.1 hours. So it's actually faster than the mains charger. Now, the only problem is, of course, I don't have a variable voltage laboratory DC power supply in the back of my four-wheel drive. But what I can do is I can get a Stepup, the likes of which you use in a travel buddy to improve the performance. You can substantially decrease the charge time going from the standard voltage up to 28 volts with a slight efficiency loss. In fact, it's 57% faster.
But it looks like the mains charger works just fine, but the 12 volt charger, standard, not much chop. But you can fix that using a 12 to 28 volt step-up converter, and I'll put the link down below. Now it's full, well, we've got to work out how well you can discharge it. And first up, the 12 volt. So we're going to plug into the outlet on the front using the computerized battery analyzer. Now this connects to my PC, and we can put a certain amount of load on this unit, and we work out exactly how many amp hours we can drag out of this unit out of that 12 volt outlet. Let's have a look at that now.
Now on the left hand side here we have watt hours discharge. Now for those who aren't familiar with watt hours, it's just basically amp hours times by the voltage. So we got our measured and we got our specifications. Let's have a look at measured first. It was 654 watt hours before the unit turned off to protect the battery. In the specifications though, it says 716 watt hours, so we're actually short 9%. Now that leads me to one of two conclusions. Either it's not actually a 12 volt or 4 cell lithium ion battery in there, or the BMS, the battery management system, is aggressive and it's cutting it off all of a sudden to protect the battery. So what I'll actually do now is I'll pop up the screen from the computerized battery analyzer and we'll check out the discharge curve. And here's a graph generated by the computerized battery analyzer. Now you can see all the test results here. It was discharged at 6.4 amps, ran for a bit over 450 minutes, 656 watt hours, or equivalent of 48, nearly 49, or roughly about 50 amp hours of battery capacity. Interesting thing to note now, lithium iron phosphate cells usually discharge with a very, very flat discharge curve, and that's what we're seeing here. But you'll notice right towards the end, usually with the lithium ion, as it's just getting towards the end there, and I set the cutoff at 10 volts to protect the cells, it usually starts dropping off, and then we'll get cut off here. But it doesn't happen here. What happens is it maintains that 12.8 volts or thereabouts consistently right to the cutoff point, and then chops off completely. Now that tells me one of two things. It's either a very, very aggressively programmed BMS or battery management system that's providing that cutoff, or it's not actually 4 lithium iron phosphate cells in there. It might be 8 and then regulated down to that 12.8 volts or thereabouts in order to get your 12 volt output. Might have to pull it apart and find out one of these days.
Oh, well, that one came up 9% short of the rated capacity. And I did that test 3 times, and each time it came within QE. Oh, on with the next test, and that's the inverter on the front of this thing. Now it's rated to 1,000 watts, and I've got 2 of these 500 watt halogens, and I'll plug them in at the same time, and we'll test the capacity. See how long it runs for. Let's have a look at the results.
This is a bit of an acid test for the Bluetti. Can it support the full 1,000 watts of load for the duration of the charge from 100% full to 0% empty? Now, theoretically, with the battery capacity, we should be able to support that 1,000 watts of load for 43 minutes at 100% efficiency. We're going to get nowhere near that, and that's fine. This is more a test of duty cycle. So what duty cycle is, can it support that 1000 watts of load from 100% charge to 0% charge? That's what I'm primarily testing here. Now, what we got was nearly half an hour, 28.8 minutes on average. So we're down 33% from the theoretical maximum, and that's fine. But what it did and what impressed me was the fact that it could support that 1000 watts of load time after time after time from 100% charge to 0% charge. Not only did this test 3 times and use the average like every other test, I did this time after time after time after time, because every time I charged it in one of the charging tests, I had to discharge it again. And not once did it falter. 100% duty cycle at 1000 watts of load every single time. There is a slight caveat. When it went down to 0% charge using that 1000 watts of load, it wouldn't actually allow me to charge it up straight away. So it was fairly warm, obviously, by the 1000 watts of load going through it, and it required about half an hour of rest before I could charge it back up again. But the fact was, it supported that 1000 watts of load time after time. I was pretty impressed with that.
So just under half an hour. I was pretty happy with that, realistically. I mean, I did it time after time. And if there's anything you need out in the bush, well, that's reliability. Now, onto the USB outlets. Now, as I alluded to before, this one's got some special features. So let's head to the healing bench and check it out. So let's have a better look at the USB charging available from the Bluetti EB70. First up, we've got 2 standard USB Type A, 5 volt, 3 amp, nothing unusual there. However, we've got PD 3.0, 100 watts, 2 Type C USB plugs here. So the difference is these are fast charge. Righto, so it's brought out by the USB implementers forum, and they look after the standards, and it's an open standard. Anyone can use this without any licensing fees. You can integrate it into your product, just as Bluetti have here. So what it can do, not only can it do 5 volts, it can do 9 volts, it can do 12 volts, it can do 15 volts, and it can do 20 volts. Now, not only can it do 20 volts, it can do 20 volts at 5 amps. So, of course, voltage times current or amperage gives you wattage. 5 times 20, there's your 100 watts. So what happens is the device you're charging communicates back with the PD, power delivery 3.0 charger, and tells it what voltage and amperage it's after. There's another system, however, called QC. QC stands for Quick Charge. It's a proprietary thing, so it's made by a company called Qualcomm. They make a lot of chips for the likes of mobile phones and whatnot, and it's actually a little bit better. It's a little bit more efficient, because not only does it do it in steps, well, this one does it in steps, just larger steps, but it can tailor make the steps to the power delivery required for the implement you're charging, for the battery you're charging. So it's a little bit more efficient. But I mean, that's not where it's going to end here. As you can see down here, I've got a trigger unit. So we're going to check that it's actually able to put out those voltages that it's supposed to. I'll change the camera angle and we'll check it out now. So I've set up the unit to scroll through the voltages. So we've got 5 volts, 9 volts, 12 volts, 15 volts, and finally 20 volts. So we can do the whole gamut, and this thing will just keep on cycling through. But we can do, like I said, 5 volts, 9 volts, 12 volts, 15 volts, and finally 20 volts in the various amperages too. And it's a lot more efficient, and it's a lot faster when you're trying to power something as power hungry as, say, a laptop. Beauty. Now, the only problem is some people have paid for the Qualcomm QC 3.0. and some companies haven't paid for the Qualcomm. So it depends on the device. So let's check out a chart now to see what sort of devices can utilise QC and which ones can utilise PD.
So what sort of devices will actually benefit from the USB PD 3.0? When it comes to iPhones, anything from the iPhone 8 on. Apple MacBooks, yep, everyone that's supplied by a USB-C power. Samsung Galaxies, anything from the Galaxy 8 on, and an example, the Asus ROG laptop, yep, that's USB powered as well, so that benefits from PD 3.0. Now, the more efficient competitor, QC 3.0, Quick Charge 3.0, from Qualcomm. Again, it's a proprietary thing, so people have to pay for it. And Apple's not on that bandwagon. They're not cutting a check for Qualcomm, so it doesn't support it with the iPhone or the MacBook. But the Galaxy, yes, it does support it, and so does the Asus ROG laptop. So it depends on your device. Check out your device and whether it actually supports PD or QC. Now, if it just supports QC and you're trying to power it with a Bluetti, you'll only get standard USB charging current, which will take quite a while to charge. So check out the specifications for your individual device.
So now we know the difference between PD and QC. Well, if you have PD, you're in luck. If you only have QC, well, you're stuck at those standard USB charging rates. All is not lost, however, because it has an inbuilt wireless charging pad on the top. Now, as you may or may well not know, wireless charging, it's not the fastest, but you don't need a cable. So you can pop it on top, and as long as the USB outlets are turned on, you're going to get your device charged, and that's great. Now, the observant amongst you will have also noticed we got a light on the front. So we'll head back to the hilling bench and test it as well. So we've set up the light meter about 30 centimetres away from the unit itself, and we'll turn it on. We've got a background luminance of about 13 or 130 lux. At stage 1, or the lowest setting, we're reading about 600 on the meter, so that's about 6,000 lux. And on the high setting, we're reading about 1200 on the meter, so about 12,000 lux. Now, for comparison's sake, I'll fire up my Makita tool battery powered torch, and we can have a look at the difference there. So now let's have a look at the Makita. So reading about 14 to 15 on the meter in the background, and we turn on the Makita, and that's giving us about 1,000 on the meter, so that's roughly about 10,000 lux. Now, to give you a comparison, outside bright sunlight, middle of the day, should be about 110 to 120,000 lux. So the light's not about to burn your retinas out at 100 metres, and that's fine. I don't think that's what it was designed to do. It's designed for a little bit of light around camp, and as far as that goes, it's fit for purpose. Now, the only thing I wish the Bluetti did have that it doesn't, and the PowerHub does have, is an Anderson outlet. They're just so universal, and they work great. They don't vibrate out when you're on the tracks running those corrugations. I run all my 12 volt off Andersons. Even my testing equipment that requires DC power is connected up by Anderson plug. They're fantastic. Much better than the 12 volt outlet on the Bluetti. And you can do things like run a small air compressor, or maybe even jump start a car when you run that stereo for a little bit too long. Anyway, a quick disclaimer first. Bluetti provided this unit to me for review, but they don't get a say in the editorial content, and they certainly don't get to see it before you guys do. Now guys, if you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and if you didn't, by all means, give it a thumbs down. Not once, not thrice, but twice. Thanks guys, we'll see you in the next one. So if you've enjoyed this content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring that bell icon. It's really important to us, and you won't miss out on our future content. Now, if you want to support the channel, by all means, consider becoming a patron on Patreon, and you get things like early access to our videos on YouTube. Either way, we hope to see you out on the tracks.